Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Spellos, and welcome to another edition of Changemakers, where we get to spend some quality time with people in our community making a huge difference in lives, their own, their families, and many, many others. Now, if you research the definition of Main Street, you'll see oftentimes it will read as the principal thoroughfare, especially through a business district or a small town. When you look at the word vegan, you'll find that it's the practice of abstaining from the use of animal products. But when you research the phrase Main Street Vegan, only one thing comes up, and that's my guest tonight, the incredible Victoria Moran. Victoria's journey is as inspiring as is her commitment to the ethical treatment of animals. So tonight we get to hear her story from her early days transitioning to a vegan lifestyle, her work as a writer and author, her wildly successful Main Street Vegan Academy, and her brand new podcast, which I'm sure she's going to talk about, called Meetings with Remarkable Women. Victoria, it is such an honor to have you on here tonight. And can I ask a favor? Could I call this show for me My Meetings with Remarkable Women?
You can call it whatever you like, and I'll try to live up to that.
I'm sure you will. Thanks so much for being here. Let's get right into it. I'm going to guess that growing up in the Midwest, there weren't a lot of vegan role models.
I didn't hear the word vegan until I was 22, but I did become vegetarian at 19. So I had wanted to be vegetarian as a kid because as soon as I heard the word, I knew there was something there for me. I always loved animals and it seemed like a good idea. But I didn't know what to eat, and every time I tried it, I'd get really healthy and really healthy. That's a Freudian. I get really hungry and probably healthy too, and went back to the status quo. But when I was 17, I discovered yoga, and that's such a strange verb to use nowadays because you don't have to discover yoga. Yoga is everywhere, but at that time, it was considered extremely exotic, probably dangerous, confused with yogurt, and both were just things to avoid. But there were 3 books on it in the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library. I read all of them, and they all said that if I was going to be serious about yoga, I needed to stop eating animals. So it took me a couple of years. It also took moving to London, where vegetarianism was established. There were health food stores, there were vegetarian restaurants. And so I was able to make that transition, had never heard the word vegan, and certainly we didn't have whole food plant-based. That was going to come decades later. But when I did hear vegan, it made a lot of sense to me, certainly ethically. The abuse that happens to cows and chickens and the eggs and dairy industries are egregious. But I was a practicing binge eater. And when I would go on those eating binges, I was lucky to be able to stay vegetarian. It was just like there were no limits. I was really out of control. And then I would try to bring myself back, and I would do the diet of the era, which was egg white omelets and unsweetened yogurt. So it took me a while, in fact, quite a while. But when it finally happened, the 60 pounds that I had been carrying just melted away without anything like dieting. And even though I thought, oh my goodness, you'll never lose a pound because if you're vegan, you're going to be eating all those carbs. Well, all those carbs just took care of that problem. And in addition, with losing the weight and the pre-diabetic status, it's now quite a bit after that. We're talking 38 years eating this way, and I don't have any of the health problems that my family of origin had before they were the age that I am now.
On the ethical side, because back then there wasn't the same knowledge that there is now about the treatment of the factory farmed animals. How did you hear about that? Then there's no internet, there's none of this new media that shared that information so readily.
Well, there's always been a group of people who know what's going on. And there were then, just as there are now. And when you look at it, even with the internet, even with the idea that everybody should know about this way of life, certainly everybody in the healthcare profession should know about this, but they don't. And so maybe just because it's very hard to figure out what it must mean billions, billions of people on the planet. It's really hard to get a message out to everybody. But in those days, there was the Vegan Society in the UK, although when I was living there, I didn't know about the Vegan Society. I knew about the Vegetarian Society. But when I got back to the States and looking into vegetarianism, which was a smaller movement here than in the UK, where they had an earlier start, I was introduced to the American Vegan Society. And the founders of that, Freya Dinshaw and her late husband, Jay, just took me under their wings. And I just so appreciate all that they did for me, because I was not an easy case. I was dealing with the binge eating. I'd be vegan and think I was doing everything right, and I was eating all natural foods and it was all great. And then it would just, all hell would break loose. But they never chastened me. They never chastised me. I think that's the word. They would always treat me like a vegan. And I really like that idea. When somebody's really trying, you just treat them like they've already arrived, and then they're going to work up to that and live up to that. And that's what happened for me.
I mean, why is it so difficult in this country for veganism to adopt? It seems like in England, both back when you're telling your story and now, there's much more acceptance to it. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, I do. And I see it in some other countries too. Israel, particularly, which has the highest vegan population per capita. And it's a small country. It's a young country. Now, the UK, of course, is a very old country, but also smaller. And I wonder if just having a smaller population group to get to has something to do with it. But I also think that in this country, we're very tied to our Wild West history, the idea of taming the wilderness, and just images like the buffalo and longhorn cattle. There's something in the American psyche that likes that sort of thing. I think there's also something maybe a little bit adventurous, but also a little bit aggressive in our heritage and our character as a nation. And I believe that makes it a little bit harder for the widespread acceptance of a vegetarian or plant-based diet to take hold.
Adventurous, dangerous, romantic, all those, thoughts about that, none of which, of course, are true, but that's another conversation for another time. I want to go back to your weight for a second, because like me, we both had major weight issues. Now, back when you were becoming vegetarian and vegan, there weren't all these plant-based burgers and plant-based everything. So what was that challenge like? I mean, again, people talk to me and say, well, what do you eat, twigs and sticks? And I go, no, there's so much great food to have. So what were you eating back then? And you mentioned binging too. So how did that all work together?
Well, lots of twigs and sticks. No, seriously, a whole food plant-based diet was pretty much what most people did then. And I know nowadays there seems to be a divide, and a lot of people have the idea, well, whole food plant-based people eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and vegans eat all kinds of burgers and cheeses and ice creams and pizzas and things like that just aren't animal products. But the truth is, in my day, as people my age, I guess, are supposed to say, we ate fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. That's what there was. I mean, there was some junk food. I mean, there was Coca-Cola, there were French fries, there were potato chips. But none of us who were interested in this sort of lifestyle wanted to eat that. Now, there were some faux meats. Interestingly enough, a little piece of trivia. These faux meats were originally developed by Buddhist monks in Japan some 1,500 years ago. So they do go back a ways. But what was available in the late 1960s and early 1970s in this country were mostly canned items developed by Seventh-day Adventist companies. And they were in the little dusty health food stores. I remember the first time I walked into one and I picked up a can of veggie hot dogs and I saw the little dust ring. Nobody had picked up that can in a long time. So the fact that there weren't all of these tempting foods available did make it easier to stay with the straight and narrow and kind of develop that as the food that even after my long history as a compulsive eater, I came to honestly prefer.
Well, I think you do once you eat that way and you realize not only how healthy it is for you, but how delicious it is at the same time. So, do you have an opinion on all the latest vegan or whole food styles that are coming out there, the burgers and this and that? What do you think about all that?
I think it's all great, and I almost never eat them. I don't care for most of them. One thing I do like are some of the really good vegan cheeses. And this is one of the areas in which I am a big label reader because I tend to avoid oil, and I absolutely avoid coconut oil because that's so high in saturated fat. A lot of the vegan cheeses are based on that. So I don't eat those. But the ones that are cashews and culture and a little bit of salt tend to be so good. You can feed them to French people. And I've always liked that sour taste. You know, some people say, oh, I'm a sweetaholic. Well, I'm a souraholic, and I really enjoy that. And you don't need very much of it. And then you eat it with your crudités, with your veggies. And that's pretty fun. So I think in the processed food arena that I like, we always have cartons of non-dairy milk. I know you can make your own nut milk. And back in the day, I even a couple of times tried to make soy milk out of beans. That was an expedition I don't intend to go on again. So, you know, those are some of the packaged and processed foods that make their way into our apartment, but there aren't many of them because the food that grows up out of the ground is really good, really satisfying, and it's kind of magical. You know, Jim, I always tell the story that one of my favorite movies from childhood was Bell, Book, and Candle. It was a 1959 maybe movie with Kim Novak in which she played a witch. And in this story, if a witch fell in love with a mortal, she lost her powers. So this was happening to Kim Novak. And she went shopping at Christmas time and she bought her Aunt Queenie, Hermione Gingold, a scarf. And Aunt Queenie took the scarf out of the box and held it up and said, "But what does it do?" And Kim Novak said, "It makes you look ravishing." And Aunt Queenie was so disappointed. She wanted magical powers. That's what I want from the food I eat. I want the food I eat to make me healthier, happier, more energetic, younger, smarter, something. I don't want it to just be like cardboard. So I look for all those colors and antioxidants, and that's what really gets me excited about food.
And those are the magical powers, obviously. So you do. So let's get back into your career. So when you were in London, you obviously were very enthralled by the movement over there. But you became a writer, correct? You were doing authoring and copywriting. Was am I correct there?
Well, I was doing magazine writing. I actually started writing for publication at 14. I had a $1 press card from a teen magazine, and lots of little girls had those, but I took mine very seriously. I was a really nerdy kid. And so I parlayed my $1 press card into getting into the Beatles press conference in Kansas City when I was 14. And I got into the Beatles press conference in Toronto at 15. And at 17 in London, Paul McCartney bought me a drink. And that was the night that I promised myself, this writing, you better stick with this. This is going to take you places nothing else can. So I had been doing that kind of writing. And then I remember at 19, I interviewed Donovan and I wrote about him for the magazine. And then I was done. It's like, I am no longer a child. I put away childish things. I probably could be editor of Rolling Stone by now if I'd done that. But anyway, gave that up. And I started writing for health food store publications, vegetarian publications, natural foods publications, and writing a lot about food.
Yeah, that's kind of a step down from Paul McCartney and Donovan.
Well, you know, when you really get excited about this way of life, and I'll bet people listening can relate to that, it is just about as exciting as having a drink with Paul McCartney. Well, maybe not quite, but it's very compelling because you can see how you feel and feel how you feel. And you can also know what you're doing for the world, what you're doing for animals. And you just get into this idea of, I want to share this. I want to spread this. This is now what I do.
Let's talk animals for a second, because I see over on the bookshelf is a picture of your, yeah, that's the direction, of your dog Forbes, who I know passed away recently. You want to give a little eulogy and share some feelings about Forbes to everyone?
Oh, that's so sweet. Forbes came into my life. It was love at first sight. He was at rescue day outside of a Petco, and he was scruffy and skinny. Turns out he had heartworm disease, but there was something about him that was so confident. And I remember walking him the first time, and a quotation that I knew from Charlie Chaplin came to mind. Chaplin had said, "Believing in yourself, that's the ticket." When I was so poor that I was scrounging the streets of London to get something to eat, I still knew that I was the greatest actor in the world. And that's the kind of confidence I felt from Forbes. He knew who he was. He knew he was who he was supposed to be. And he probably knew that he was supposed to rescue me. So it looked like I rescued him. It probably went both ways, and then reached out to rescue my husband too. We were kind of a three-way soulmate circle. Forbes was a healer. He was an empath, and he was a great New Yorker. He loved the subway. He loved cafes. He loved taxis, and he loved us and we loved him. So Forbes, you are lighting up heaven, and I am so grateful to have an angel with fur on.
That's beautiful. So moving forward, you have this thing I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this little phrase, Main Street Vegan. Talk to me about how that phrase came about, and more importantly, talk to me about the offshoot of it, the Main Street Vegan Academy.
Sure. Well, I came up with the phrase probably because I grew up 2 blocks off Main Street in Kansas City, Missouri. And there's long been an idea, when you're not vegan, that vegans are somebody else. Maybe they're old hippies, or they would have been hippies if they'd been alive, or they're leftover punk rockers, or they're celebrities. There's somebody that's not me. And yet I thought, I'm a Main Street vegan, and I kind of like that. And when I was inspired to write a book on this topic, I've written a lot of books on veganism, and I've written a lot about spirituality and other things, and they kind of cycle back. But I had the inspiration for Main Street Vegan. And then just a fun aside story is that when we got a publisher, because the way it works in nonfiction is you write a proposal, then you get a publisher, then you write the book. The publisher didn't like Main Street. And so I was trying to come up with another title, and everything seemed very blah. And then my husband and I were walking up Broadway, and we saw somebody so famous that you could recognize him from the back. And that was Michael Moore, the filmmaker. Well, he had liked one of my earlier books, a weight loss book that I had written called Fit From Within. And so I just gave my card to the woman who was with him. I didn't want to, be like a fangirl. And then a few seconds later, we hear, "Victoria!" So Michael Moore comes chasing us up Broadway, and we exchange pleasantries. And he says, "We need to talk. We need to talk about food." And in one of these conversations, he said, "That's a great title. I'll talk to your editor." So in a three-way conversation with an Academy Award winner and my editor and me, we got Main Street Vegan. And when my editor called 2 days later to tell me that she had convinced the higher ups and that was indeed the title of the book, then it was like those comic book bubbles. All these ideas started to pop. There ought to be a Main Street Vegan podcast. There ought to be a Main Street Vegan production company for documentaries. There ought to be a Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. And there has been since 2012. We're about to do our 34th cohort starting October 1st, live via Zoom. And our graduates now are not just coaching and consulting, but they're speaking, they're writing books, they're podcasting, they're opening all kinds of businesses, everything from bed and breakfast to cowboy boots to cheese and yogurt to retail bodegas. And then some of them are working for animal rights organizations, plant-based companies. So I'm so proud of my graduates and always so excited every time a new course starts, because it's kind of like a new beginning.
So, and also one of the people who are at the helm of Planned Parenthood Metro New York, and one of your graduates, Leanna Levine Reisner. So,
She's a star.
no, the star. She's my boss too. So, of course, she's a huge star. Transitioning to Zoom, was that a difficult thing for you?
You know, it was in a way. We did the academy live in my apartment until the pandemic. So from 2012 through 2019, it was really live, and 20 people would converge on my New York apartment for every day for 6 days, 3 or 4 times a year. And it was a lot of work, but it was so much fun. It was like having an all-day party every day for a week. We did field trips because there are lots of vegan businesses in New York. And we had people who had never been to New York before, people coming from other countries who'd never been to the States before. So it was grand. But those days are over. And what is so wonderful now about Zoom is that we can have incredible presenters who come from all over the country. We have panels of our graduates, and some of them are even coming in from other countries to share what they're doing. We've got practice time where we used to take field trips, but now we can really work on coaching techniques and ways to really use what we're learning to take out into the world and change the world and change people's lives. Plus, it's a lot easier not to have to come to New York City and find a place to stay. So we're happy on Zoom.
I want to make sure that people see the URL for the mainstreetvegan.com that's out there. But you have so many new ventures happening, and one of them we alluded to at the very beginning, which is Meetings with Remarkable Women. Tell us about that. It's just started, has it not?
Yes. The podcast started last Thursday, and I believe if I got everything in on time, we'll have the second one tomorrow. So our first guest was Agapi Stassinopoulos, who is a writer in the spiritual world, mostly the women's spirituality world. Her sister is Arianna Huffington, and they work together at Thrive Global doing all kinds of amazing things. And our guest tomorrow is Reverend Sarah Bowen, who is an animal chaplain and a spiritual rebel, which is the name of one of her books. That was a fascinating conversation. So the Victoria Moran podcast, Meetings with Remarkable Women, is on all podcast platforms. And anybody who subscribed to the earlier podcast, the Main Street Vegan podcast, which I did for 10 years, 475 episodes, it's the same RSS feed. So you can go back and find some of that programming when I've interviewed a lot of very cool plant-based experts, including Leanna Levine Reisner. So it's kind of fun if you're somebody who likes to snoop around in archives.
Mm-hmm. How did you come up with the name?
Meetings with Remarkable Women? When I moved to London on my 18th birthday, there was a movie playing in the West End that was called Meetings with Remarkable Men. It was about the philosopher Gurdjieff, but it was the title that really stuck with me. And I knew that I wanted to spend my life in meetings with remarkable people and take in what they knew and be inspired by them and turn their knowledge and their wisdom into something personal for me that I could use to change the world. And the reason that I'm doing Meetings with Remarkable Women is probably because I made the decision right around the day that the Supreme Court made its decision about women's reproductive rights. And I thought, there are so many incredible men in the world and in this movement of ours. And yet I'd like to spend at least a few years just focusing on the women, sharing women's wisdom, women's stories, women's experience. And so far, it's working really well.
That's fantastic. I can't wait. Actually, I've had a sneak listening to it, and it is pretty remarkable. So thank you for doing that. we're getting close to the end of time, so you also have something new in the works regarding a website, correct?
Yes, because my next book, hopefully, I need a publisher. I'm not the self publishing kind of person. I go through the traditional channels. I want this book to be Age Like a Yogi, a heavenly path to a dazzling third act. And in order to do that, my agent says, well, you've got this big vegan reputation. So you're going to have to remind people that you had another reputation before this past 10 years when you've been Main Street Vegan, and you need a website called victoriamoran.com. So we're working very hard on that. As of this moment, it is not live, but I have a feeling that by maybe Monday or Tuesday, with any luck, it will be. And this is a website about me as an author and about some of these other ways that people can express themselves and get their message out into the world. So I'm excited about what's going to go on there too.
Incredible stuff. And also in terms of the works, the film in the offering as well?
Well, I hope so. This is actually my husband's brainchild, and I came on board very early as co-writer. It is a screenplay called Miss Liberty, about a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse and the human drama that ensues. So right now, we have a Twitter account, Miss Liberty Film. It'd be wonderful if anybody's still on Twitter to follow us there. And we're about to get busy with the website and a teaser and a Indiegogo and all that stuff, and just see what we can do. And hopefully in maybe a year and a half or so, Miss Liberty will be streaming near you.
That would be wonderful. Victoria, you've been interviewed so many times by so many people. You've had your own podcast for years and years. Is there a question that you've never been asked that you think needs to be asked of you? And if so, what's the answer to it?
Wow. I wish you had told me that one in advance.
You're the second person
I
to
feel like,
question.
people,
What comes to the top of your head? What haven't you been asked that you think really would be something that people
I feel like well, nobody's ever asked where I get my protein. I guess you could ask that.
No.
Well, a question that I would like to answer is, what do animals have to do with it? You have this great way to eat. It's so health promoting. It's so excellent. Why muddy the waters by bringing in the animals? And for me, I could not be living this way of life if it wasn't for the animals. Because as I said earlier, I'm a food addict. Half of my recovery was the whole food plant-based diet, and the other half was a 12-step program for overeaters. So I needed change from the inside out. And what sustained me early on and continues to sustain me to this day is knowing that the choices that I make are not just for me, but they're for the innocents. They're for animals I'll never know and never see. But I know that just by the way I live, I'm saving some lives and changing some lives, and that keeps me going and probably always will.
You didn't need to know that question in advance. That was a beautiful answer. And with that, I hate to say that 30 minutes is up, but we have been just so lucky to have you on our show this month. Thank you for everything. Tell us again, Main Street Vegan Academy, when is it starting up?
It starts October 1st. And because I love, love, love Plant-Powered Metro New York, if you are interested in attending the Academy in October, I want to give you a code that will save you 20% on your tuition. And that is Kindness20, kindness with a capital K.
Kindness20. It is. Victoria, you've been so kind to be here today. So thank you so much. And while we're wrapping up today, I just want to tell everyone that next month on Change Makers, we have Plant-Powered Metro New York's own superstar, Chef Carol Levy, and we'll discuss the creation of the Cooking with Chef Carol show. It's a monthly staple here on our social channels, and that'll be live Thursday, the 13th of October at 7 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of everyone here at Plant-Powered Metro New York, I'm Jim Spellos, wishing you optimal health, and see you right here once again next month on Changemakers. Take care now.